Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
They climbed the mountain. They conquered the American League. They stood on the World Series stage again for the first time in a generation. They spent money like a franchise that finally believed the mirror when it said, "You belong here." And yet, somehow, in the quiet moments when no cameras were rolling and no box scores were being refreshed, the Toronto Blue Jays managed to trip over something so small, so human, that it echoed louder than any free agent splash. Because this story isn't really about losing Don Mattingly. It's about how they let him go. And that detail, invisible on the scoreboard, speaks volumes. While fans were still replaying that 7-game heartbreak against the Dodgers in their heads, still tasting the bittersweet pride of a pennant wrapped in disappointment, the front office turned what should have been a dignified, almost ceremonial transition into a source of public unease. This wasn't a collapse. It wasn't a scandal. It was something subtler and, in some ways, more revealing. And here on the Blue Jays Report, those are often the moments that matter most. Let's ground ourselves in reality before emotions take the wheel. This was one of the finest seasons the Blue Jays have produced in decades. 94 wins. An American League East title that ended a 10-year wait. A city that rediscovered October nights with meaning. John Schneider transformed from a manager under scrutiny into the steady hand of a pennant-winning club. The roster responded, the fan base rallied, and Toronto felt alive in a way it hadn't since the early 90s. Losing the World Series to the Dodgers hurt, especially in 7 games, especially watching a familiar rival lift the trophy again. But no serious baseball mind calls an AL title a failure. Ross Atkins certainly didn't. His response was immediate and unapologetic. Accelerate. The offseason reflected that mindset in bold ink. Dylan Cease arrived on a 7-year, $210 million deal to anchor the rotation like a cornerstone sunk deep into bedrock. Kazuma Okamoto crossed the ocean not as a project, but as a finished product, ready to contribute now. Tyler Rogers bolstered the bullpen with the kind of contract usually reserved for teams that can already picture the parade route. Toronto behaved like a contender because, for once, it truly was one. And then, quietly, almost awkwardly, a legend slipped out the back door. Don Mattingly is a name that carries weight in any baseball conversation. A former MVP. A respected leader. Over the last 3 years, a calm, influential presence on the Blue Jays coaching staff. He wasn't loud. He didn't chase headlines. He was the kind of figure whose value you often only realize when he's no longer there. And his departure wasn't dramatic. It wasn't contentious. It wasn't about money or ego or power. It was, almost absurdly, about family. Mattingly made his intentions clear early in the offseason. He wanted to step away from the bench coach role and join the Philadelphia Phillies organization, where his son, Preston Mattingly, serves as general manager. No secrecy. No maneuvering. Just a father wanting to work alongside his son as his career entered its final chapters. In baseball terms, it was about as clean and honest a transition as you'll ever see. And yet, it stalled. According to reports from Todd Zolecki and Paul Casella of MLB.com, the Phillies were unable to make Mattingly's hiring official until his Blue Jays contract expired on December 31st. Toronto chose to hold him to the letter of that deal, right up until the very last day. Technically permissible. Perfectly legal. And immediately noticed by people who understand how this sport really works. Jim Bowden, a former MLB general manager and now a respected voice with The Athletic, didn't hide his disbelief. He described Mattingly as one of the classiest professionals in the game, someone who handled the situation with transparency and respect. And then came the question that lingered like an unfinished sentence. Why make him wait? Why not simply pay out the remainder of the contract and allow him to move on? That's where this story stops being about Don Mattingly and starts being about the Toronto Blue Jays. Because when a team fresh off a World Series appearance chooses rigidity over grace in a human moment, it raises eyebrows. It's not against the rules. It's not a crime. But it's also not how the most secure organizations tend to behave. In baseball, reputation travels faster than press releases. Coaches talk. Executives compare notes. Agents remember how people are treated when the spotlight is dim. Decisions like this don't vanish into the off-season ether. They linger, quietly filed away, shaping perceptions that matter when the next big hire or negotiation comes along. The official tone from Toronto suggested understanding and empathy. They knew Mattingly's reasons. They respected his desire. But empathy that traps someone in contractual limbo isn't really empathy. It's paperwork dressed up as principle. And that contradiction is where the discomfort lives. The irony is hard to ignore. This was the same organization that opened the vault without hesitation for Dylan Cease. The same front office that committed long-term money to chase the final step. And yet, when faced with a relatively simple, human request that carried no competitive downside, the door stayed shut until the calendar forced it open. It feels small because it is small, but small things often reveal the most. Look around the league at the franchises that live in October year after year. The Dodgers understand this. The Braves understand it. The Astros understood it for a long time. When teams are truly all in, they loosen the reins behind the scenes. They know that trust, goodwill, and flexibility are part of the competitive ecosystem. Toronto wants to sit at that table, but moments like this suggest it's still learning the unspoken rules of membership. Don Mattingly wasn't just another coach with a title on a door. He was a bridge. Between veterans and staff. Between the front office and the clubhouse. Between pressure and perspective. Yes, he's 64. Yes, his on-field impact in 2026 might have been marginal. But experience at that level doesn't depreciate overnight, and symbolism matters more than spreadsheets admit. Now consider it from the most basic human angle. A professional who helped guide a team to the World Series. Who was honest about his next step. Who did everything by the book. And still had to wait, watching days tick by, simply because the contract said so. It's not a scandal. It's not malicious. But it's not warm either. Around the league, it reads as unnecessary rigidity at a time when warmth costs nothing. It's like a company that knows an employee is leaving, has already planned the transition, has already filled the role, and yet insists on holding them until the final minute just to assert control. What do you gain from that? Practically nothing. What do you lose? Goodwill, quietly and permanently. So let's be direct about the balance sheet here. The Phillies gain an experienced, respected voice with deep emotional ties to their leadership. Don Mattingly gains the chance to work alongside his son and close out his career in a setting that makes personal sense. And the Blue Jays gain nothing. No competitive edge. No leverage. Just a brief wave of criticism that distracts from what should have been a celebratory off-season. Does this single decision derail Toronto's future? Of course not. The roster is strong. Expectations for 2026 are sky high. The rotation is deep, the lineup has been reinforced, and the objective is unmistakable. But championship organizations are defined by how quickly they learn where flexibility matters. Winning isn't just about stacking talent. It's about understanding people. Before we wrap this up, if you appreciate these behind-the-scenes conversations that go beyond headlines, make sure you like the video, share it with fellow Jays fans, and subscribe to the Blue Jays Report. It helps keep this space alive for thoughtful, honest discussion. Because come October, it's often the smallest details that return to collect their due. Not always on the field. Sometimes in trust, perception, and culture. And those, more than any contract, tend to decide who's still standing at the end.